Let us start.
Yes. Good morning, everyone, and a warm good morning to all the students of TSMS. See, myself, Mrs. Sridevi Polu, Principal, TSMS Pudur, is privileged and honored to welcome the speaker of the day, Mrs. N. Rama Kalyani, PGT Physics from TSMS Pudur, Vikarabad. Dear children, see, whenever you see me, you will be thinking that I'm a chemistry coordinator. Then how come I'm here to invite Mrs. N. Rama Kalyani, PGT Physics, isn't it? See, today I'm very privileged to say this because Mrs. N. Rama Kalyani is a very hardworking teacher, and she has started this physics webinars from the month of July, right? So from many days, I'm thinking to invite her to introduce her to you because she is a fantastic teacher. I can say that, and also a wonderful personality. And today, ma'am is going to explain you regarding matter. See, we all know that matter has dual nature. What is the meaning of dual? Dual means double role, isn't it? So it exists as a particle and also as a wave. And she is going to explain the photoelectric effect also. So who has given the photoelectric effect? Einstein's photoelectric effect. What is the meaning of photo? Photo means light. When light is incident upon a plane of surface like metals, see, they will emit electrons, right? They will emit light, right? So regarding this, ma'am is going to explain today. So good morning, Rama ma'am. Good morning,
Good morning, madam.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning, madam. Good morning.
Good morning. A happy welcome.
Very happy, ma'am.
Thank
you so much, ma'am.
See, I'm thankful to Shailaja ma'am, see, for making me happy today. So thank you, Shailaja ma'am.
Thank you, madam.
Thank you. I would like to invite Rama ma'am, and I would like to hand over the session to her. All the best, ma'am.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Hello, dear children. Good morning, all of you. So how are you all doing? Right? So today we are here to discuss the final session on our chapter, Dual Nature of Radiation and Matter. Children, I hope you have reviewed the previous webinars on this chapter where we have introduced the concept of dual nature of radiation and its proof in the form of the photoelectric effect. Right, children? And we have also come across various equations like how the kinetic energy is dependent upon the frequency and the stopping potential is dependent upon the kinetic energy. We have understood the definitions of saturation current and stopping potential also. We came up to derive the famous Einstein's photoelectric equation also, and then we have seen the various factors on which the photoelectric current depends. Children, in today's session, we are going to learn more and more, that is dual nature of matter. Right, children? Radiation and matter are two entities, two important physical entities of our nature. So we have seen, we have proved the dual nature of radiation, and in this session, we are going to study about the dual nature of matter importantly. So before that, let us have a quick review of what we have learned in these classes. Children, to begin with, we had learned in the previous session about the effects of the factors on which the photocurrent depends. So initially, we have seen the intensity of light, children. Intensity of light means the number of photons being emitted per unit area. So the photoelectric current increases linearly with intensity of the incident radiation. So as the intensity of incident radiation increases, the photoelectric current increases. Right, children? This is the first factor, that is intensity and photoelectric current, vary linearly with each other, or they are directly proportional to each other. The second one we have defined the saturation current by varying the photocurrent with the voltage. What type of voltage, children? Yes, the positive potential. When we increased the positive potential with respect to the emitter plate. Okay, children, when we increase the positive potential with respect to the emitter plate or the cathode plate, then the current reaches a maximum value and becomes saturated. Okay, saturated means it can comes to a stop. Further increase in the potential also does not increase the value of current. So this maximum value of current is called as the saturation current. And then we have seen that the variation in intensity, even if you increase the intensity, then the saturation current increases, and then there is something called as a stopping potential, children. What is stopping potential? The negative potential for which the current becomes zero. The negative potential for which the current becomes zero. Where did this negative potential come from? Yes, after we have reached the maximum current, the saturation current value, what did we do, children? If you remember in the experiment, yes, we started giving a retarding potential to the anode plate, that is the collector plate. Now the collector plate was becoming negative compared to the cathode plate. Right, children? So because of this variation in the potential, what is happening, children? The current started to decrease gradually. The current started to decrease gradually, and at one particular voltage, the retarding potential, it became equal to zero. This voltage is called as the stopping potential. Right, children? We defined this. And then we went on to learn that when you increase the intensity of the incident radiation, the saturation current increases. See, children, for intensity I1, there is some value of saturation current. For I2, there is some value of saturation current, which is a little bit higher. Similarly, for intensity I3, there is some saturation current, which is higher than the both of them. But look at the stopping potential, children. The stopping potential is the same for all the three intensities. What does it mean, children? It means that the stopping potential does not depend upon the intensity of the incident radiation. So what does it depend upon? We have seen that the stopping potential depends upon the frequency of the incident radiation. Right, children? The kinetic energy of the emitted electrons is independent of the intensity of incident radiation. Okay, children? See, children, here the electrons are moving very fastly from cathode to anode plate. So they must be possessing some kinetic energy. This kinetic energy is independent of the intensity of light. Whatever may be the intensity of light, less intensity, more intensity, kinetic energy does not depend upon intensity. That is, even if you increase the intensity, kinetic energy will be the same. So potential also remains the same, stopping potential. But kinetic energy of the emitted electrons is a function of its frequency. Right, children? The frequency of the incident radiation. Okay, children? That is number of wave cycles coming in a second. Okay, number of wave cycles in a second. So, or number of photons in a second, you can say. Intensity is number of photons in a unit area. Frequency is number of photons in a second. Okay. So, kinetic energy of the emitted electron depends upon the frequency of the incident radiation, and hence the stopping potential also depends upon the frequency of the incident radiation. So this we can understand by this equation. Kmax is equals to h nu minus h nu naught. Kmax is the maximum kinetic energy of the emitted electrons. H nu is where nu is the frequency of the incident radiation. H is the Planck's constant. Yes. H nu naught. H nu naught is nothing but the work function, children. It is the work function that we have already seen. And next, we also came across this equation called as the Einstein's photoelectric equation, children, where the maximum kinetic energy given by half mv max square is equals to h nu minus phi naught. Phi naught is the work function of the metal. Then we have seen that light is absorbed or emitted in quanta called as photons. How did we come to this idea, children? Yes, with the help of Einstein. So it was actually the genius of Max Planck, who had described that energy is either emitted or absorbed in the form of discrete units called as quanta. Okay, children? And one quanta of energy is called as E is equals to h nu. Now, Einstein, in order to better understand photoelectric effect, in order to give an explanation for photoelectric effect, that how is this particles form coming out when you are incidenting light on radiation of light on cathode plate, how is it that particles are coming out? So to give a better explanation to this, Einstein took the help of this equation, E is equal to h nu. He applied it here in photoelectric effect, right, children? And said that just like energy, light is also a form of energy. So energy, light also should be emitted or absorbed in discrete packets called quantum of light. And this each quantum of light is called a photon. And each photon has an energy of E is equal to h nu. Okay, children? And then we went on to derive the momentum of each photon, which came out to be P is equals to h by lambda. P is equals to h by lambda, where lambda is the wavelength. Lambda is the wavelength of the radiation, incident radiation. Okay, children, so this is what we have learned in the previous session. And in today's session, let us see what we are going to learn. In today's session, we are going to learn the applications of photoelectric effect. Last class, we have seen the experimental study. And now, see children, whenever there is a phenomena, we should know its applications also, where we are using them, okay? Then we have the wave nature of particles, the de Broglie relation, de Broglie wavelength of an accelerated electron, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. We are going to see some numerical problems on de Broglie wavelength. And then we are going to see a very important phenomena, an important topic, the Davison-Germer experiment, which proved the wave nature of matter particles. Okay, children, it was de Broglie who gave the hypothesis, who gave the theory, and it was the experiment of Davison and Germer who proved that electrons or matter particles do exhibit wave nature. Okay, children, keep this in mind. Children, to begin with, the applications of photoelectricity. So the basic application of photoelectricity is in the form of a photoelectric cell, children. It is this diagram, the image that you're seeing is a photoelectric cell. So this photoelectric cell consists something like a bulb, right, children? And the semicircular metal sheet that you are seeing here is the cathode. It is a cathode, children. Okay, children, it is the cathode plate. And this one, the inside part, the stick glass sort of thing you're seeing, this is the anode rod, children. Okay, the anode is in the form of rod, and the semicircular or the concave cathode is in the form of concave. What could be the reason, children? Yes, we know concave. The concave shape is a converging shape. Yes, children, you have learned as in the concave mirror. A concave shape is a converging shape. So whenever incident radiation falls upon this cathode, then they all will focus. The emitted electrons will be focused onto the anode. Okay, children, the emitted electrons will be focused onto the anode. Electrons are collected on the anode and a current is produced. A current is produced in the circuit. See, children, these are the terminals of the photoelectric cell. Understood, children? This is the photoelectric cell. This is a basic cell. And we are making use of this photoelectric cell in many more appliances. Okay, children? So a photoelectric cell is a device which converts into light into electrical energy. Photoemitter cell, photoconducting cell, and photovoltaic cell are different kinds of photoelectric cell. Depending upon the appliances, we are making use of this photoelectric cell. The next one we are going to see is an electromagnetic relay, children. If you observe the image here, children, yes. An electromagnetic field is produced in this coil, children. Because of this coil, an electromagnetic field is produced, and there is an attraction and repulsion going on here. Because of that, there is a movement in the switch, children. This is the switch here. Okay, children? This acts as the on-off switch. or yes or no switch. Right, children? Now, the photoelectric cell combined with this electromagnetic relay are being operated together for many other devices. So an electromagnetic relay operates on the principle of electromagnetic attraction. It is a type of magnetic switch which uses the magnet for creating magnetic field. So here a magnetic field is created and the magnetic field is used for closing and opening the switch. Okay, children. So when the switch is closed, current passes through it, and when the switch is open, there is no current flowing. Okay, children. We see the application of photoelectricity in the television cameras also. So a television camera consists of, inside the television, we know there is a cathode ray tube, and this is a film on which a spot here is focused through the lens, and through the lens it is falling on the phototube. Phototube is nothing but the photoelectric cell, children. Okay, so here television camera makes use of the photoelectric emission principle. And how we are going to understand this here, the bright light or the bright colors on the screen are taken as high electric signals, and the dark lights are taken as low electric signals. Moving on to the next application, children. This is a fire alarm that is used in the factories. Okay, children. We have seen, or we might have heard, that whenever there's a fire breaking out in a factory, there is an alarm going on. Okay, children. There is an alarm that starts ringing. So how does this alarm ring? This alarm again has the principle of photoelectric effect in this. So when fire breaks out, the fire illuminates, right, children? Fire is nothing but light. Okay, so this light illuminates the cathode plate of the photoelectric cell, and from this the relay, the electromagnetic relay, operates the yes switch. Okay, children, the electromagnetic relay here operates the yes switch, and the circuit is closed now, and the bell starts ringing. The alarm goes on now. Right, children? Now next, this is another type of a street light which uses the photoelectric cell concept. So here also we are combining the photoelectric cell along with the relay, the electromagnetic relay. The circuit is kept facing the sky, children. So what is happening here, during the daytime or during the night time, it is off. The bulb doesn't glow. So when there is a cloudy sky or during the night time, what is happening? The relay goes on, the electromagnetic relay goes on, that is switch is on for the bulb, and the bulb starts glowing. So during daytime, the switch is automatically put off. Children, this is a light meter, children, which is used by professional cameramen, especially during the recordings of movies or television shows. So here, as you can see the numbers here, children, this indicates the intensity of light. So this is placed in front of the or alongside the artist. Suppose movie shooting is taking place and we have an artist there. So the camera is focused onto the artist, and this object is used to check the intensity, if the intensity is sufficient for getting a very good image of the artist. In this way, children, you can understand it is the same thing. The light source is here, the light is falling on the artist, and beside the artist only there is a handheld meter, what we have seen, and this meter will record the intensity of the incoming light, and it will with the help of this, the cameraman can understand, the cameraman here can understand if it is sufficient enough to get a good photograph or a good recording. Okay, children, so we have another application here. These are photovoltaic cells are used in converting solar radiations to electrical EMF. Okay, children, so this is a solar panel. So these solar panel make use of photovoltaic cells which convert into electricity. Right, children? Now, here before entering the actual topic, we will discuss about the Bohr's law of complementarity. Okay, children, as the name suggests, this was given by Niels Bohr. Now we have come to a conclusion that radiation has dual nature. That is, radiation can behave as both a wave and a particle. As you can see in the images, children, below. One side you have the wave nature, electromagnetic radiation in wave nature, and here in the form of particle nature. You can assume them to be photons moving with high speeds. Okay, children. Now, this law of Bohr says that, yes, radiation may be having both nature. It can either be a wave or it can be a particle. Right, children? Stressing on the word or, which means that it can be a wave or a particle at a given instant of time, but it cannot be the same. It cannot behave as both at the same time. Okay, children? It cannot behave as both at the same time. Right, children? So, radiation can either behave as a wave or as a particle depending upon the situation. Right, children? See, in phenomena like diffraction, interference, polarization, we have seen the wave nature of light. Yes or no, children? We have seen the wave nature of light, because these cannot be exhibited if we consider the particle phenomena. So there, light is taking up the wave, its wave nature. Okay, children? And when we have to discuss about effects like photoelectric effect, Compton effect, that at this time the particle nature is coming into picture. Okay, children? But it cannot exhibit both of them together at the same time. That is the important point here. That is Bohr's law of complementarity. Children, this great scientist is Louis Victor de Broglie. Okay, children? He is Louis Victor de Broglie. So he mentioned that, or he hypothesized that if radiation can have both natures, wave and particle nature, then why can't matter have? Yes, children, we have always considered radiation to be a wave, but then scientists have proved that yes, it can behave as particle also. Then he came up with a simple logic that nature loves symmetry, children. Okay, that means nature tries to balance everything. Okay, now radiation and matter are both symmetric entities of nature. Okay, radiation and matter are two entities of nature, so there should be a balance in between these two. Now if radiation can exhibit dual nature, then definitely matter should also exhibit dual nature. What is matter, children? Matter is nothing but it is made up of particles, we know. Okay, so for now the particles that we know are, that is the most fundamental particles we know are electrons, protons, neutrons, etc. So we know that all matter is a combination of, or is made up of all these microscopic particles. Okay, children? So Louis Victor de Broglie in 1924 hypothesized that matter particles exhibit wave nature under suitable conditions. Okay, children? So it was his hypothesis, it was his theory that if radiation can exhibit dual nature, then matter also can exhibit dual nature. It should exhibit dual nature. It was his hypothesis in 1924. We know E is equals to h nu is the energy of a photon. And E is equal to mc square is the Einstein's mass energy relation, children. This is where we are seeing the symmetry of mass and energy. So the mass energy symmetry is present for waves. Yes or no, children? We have already proved this. We have proved from E is equals to h nu to Einstein's equation E is equal to mc square is also applicable for the radiation. Yes, children? So mass energy symmetry is present for waves. Then de Broglie proposed the same symmetry for matter particles. Understood, children? When radiation can have both the symmetries, when radiation can take both the symmetry, then de Broglie assumed that matter particles also should be having the same symmetry. The mass energy symmetry should be applicable for matter particles also. Particles may also behave as waves observably at the microscopic level. So he emphasized that, or he stressed that particles of matter also should be behaving as waves under suitable conditions and observably for the microscopic particles. Okay, children? See, what de Broglie wanted to say is wave should be associated with any matter. Okay, children? then aren't we also matter particles, children? Yes, we are also made up of matter particles. Yes or no? That means there should be a wave associated with us also. There should be a wave associated with the moving buses also. There should be a wave associated with the train. There should be a wave associated with a ball thrown in air. According to De Broglie, yes, but it is observable for microscopic particles. So this is called as the dual nature of matter. Okay, children, this is called as the dual nature of matter. So who has hypothesized this, children, dual nature of matter? De Broglie has hypothesized this concept of dual nature of matter. Okay, and who proved it, children? Yes, it was proved by Davison and Germer experiment. Right, children, now we are going to learn more about the matter waves. Waves associated with matter particles are called matter waves or de Broglie waves. Okay, children? Now, as we are saying, matter particles like electrons, protons, neutrons, atoms and molecules are also particles only, children. So, all these, when they are moving, they should be associated with a wave called as a matter wave, or because it is hypothesized by de Broglie, they are also called as de Broglie waves. Electrons have definite mass and move with some velocity. Yes or no, children? We know that electrons have mass. How much? What is the mass of electrons, children? Right, 9.1 into 10 to the power of minus 31 kg. That is the mass of an electron, and they also move with some velocity. Isn't it, children? They are moving around the nucleus with some velocity. Definitely when they are moving, we must say they are in motion. They are moving with some velocity. Davison and Germer. See, children, just now we were discussing the proof of this matter waves came with Davison and Germer. They proved that electrons exhibit diffraction. Diffraction, children, is a wave phenomena. A phenomena that can be expressed by waves only and not by particles. So they observed that electrons exhibit the diffraction phenomena. We know electron is a particle, but how is it that electrons are able to produce diffraction? They produce diffraction only if they can behave as wave in suitable conditions or in certain conditions. Children, you can observe here some pattern is coming, children, and if you clearly observe, there are some dots appearing. These dots are nothing but they are the image or the reflection of electrons being emitted. Now, if you see, children, a certain pattern is followed. Here we have a completely filled band. There is a gap here, a completely filled band here with particles, and then there is a gap here. That means we have a bright band, we have a dark band, high intensity, low intensity, low intensity. This is nothing but this concept is of interference, children, or diffraction, which is purely a wave phenomena. Now, Davison and Germer in their experiment proved this with electrons, electron beams. So, which clearly shows that electrons behave as waves under certain circumstances, or particles exhibit wave nature. Particles exhibit wave nature. So let us come to an important relation, children, that is called as the de Broglie relation. Now we know that we are satisfied, or we are saying that matter particles move as waves with a wavelength lambda called as the de Broglie wavelength. Okay, children. Now we are contended, okay, that matter waves, yes, matter particles are behaving as waves. So the wave associated with these particles is called as matter wave. When it is a wave, it should have a certain frequency, it should have a certain wavelength, isn't it, children? So let us say lambda is the de Broglie wavelength. Okay, children, and we will begin with these equations because de Broglie said that mass energy symmetry, if it exists for radiation, then it should exist for matter particles also. So we are taking the two equations from Planck and Einstein. E is equals to h nu and E is equal to mc square. What is C here, children? Let us see one by one. E is the energy associated with the particles. H is the Planck's constant. Nu is the frequency of the radiation. M is the mass of the particles. C is velocity of light in vacuum given by how much, children? 3 into 10 to the power of 8 meters per second. So we know for wave C is equals to, C has a formula given by nu lambda. Yes, children, it is nu lambda. So from here, nu can be written as C by lambda. Nu is equals to C by lambda. That we are going to substitute here. E is equals to, instead of H nu, we are going to write H into C by lambda, which is equal to mc square. Right, children? So here, one C will get cancelled. This C will get cancelled with one of the C here. So we are left with H by lambda on the left hand side and mc on the right hand side. Or with mutual transformation, I can write lambda is equal to H by mc. H by mc. This is the de Broglie relation, children. We are going to continue it further. Before going to the next slide, can you tell me what will you say about m into c? What is the physical quantity here? Mass into velocity of light. Mass into velocity. What is the product of mass into velocity called, children? You remember? Right. It is called as the momentum. So here we are talking about the momentum of the photon or momentum of the quanta of radiation. Okay, children? So lambda is equals to H by momentum. This one, children. mc is equals to P. P is nothing but the momentum of particle. So lambda I can write as H by P. This is one of the important equations, children. Lambda is equals to H by P. A quantum particle with momentum P is associated with a wavelength lambda. For a matter particle moving with velocity v, lambda is equals to H by mv. Now, if it is a photon, we are writing it as lambda is equals to H by P. Yes, children, because we know photons move with the speed of light. Photons move with the speed of light. And for a matter particle moving with velocity v, we write lambda is equals to H by mv. Okay, children, where m is the mass of the particle, the matter particle, and v is the velocity with which the matter particle is moving. This phenomenal equation is called as the de Broglie relation. Okay, children, this phenomenal, very, very important equation relation is called as the de Broglie relation. These two are important, children. Now let us have a small discussion on these two equations. From the equations, we could understand that the de Broglie wavelength lambda is inversely proportional to the velocity of the particle. Yes, children, the de Broglie wavelength lambda is inversely proportional to the velocity v. So what happens if v becomes equal to 0? If v becomes equal to 0, then lambda is infinite. Okay, a very, 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 very long wavelength, which we cannot imagine, which we cannot see also. Okay, children. So what does it mean, children? For v is equal to 0, that is if the particle is not moving. If the particle is not moving, then the de Broglie wavelength is infinite or it does not exist. Okay, and if lambda is proportional to 1 by m, that is, we know from the formula lambda is proportional to 1 by m, or lambda is inversely proportional to m, which means smaller the mass of the particle, higher is the wavelength. Okay, children, small mass particles, microscopic particles have very, 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 very small wavelengths, so their wavelengths are quite high. Okay, and lambda is again inversely proportional to momentum of the photon. Okay, children, or the momentum of the quantum particle. So larger the momentum of the particle, shorter is the wavelength. Okay, children, if it is a photon or a particle with a very large momentum, then the wavelength is very, very, very short. Okay, and in the entire thing, we have seen that there is absence of the, or there is no mention of the charge of the particle. That is, whether it is electron, whether it is proton, whether it is neutron, the wavelength, the de Broglie wavelength is independent of the charge of the particle. Is it clear, children? The wavelength, de Broglie wavelength is independent. It does not depend upon the charge of the particle. Now, children, for an example, let us try to find out the de Broglie wavelength of a macroscopic object. As we have been discussing, we all are matter, children. We all are made up of matter. Similarly, a ball. Let us consider a ball of mass 0.12 kgs. We know it is also made up of matter, children. Yes, and it is moving with a speed of 20 meters per second. Just like you and me, the table, the chair, the trees, and the stones, the rocks, whatever, the ball is also a macroscopic object, children. Macroscopic object, something we can see with our eyes. Okay. So de Broglie wavelength of a ball of mass 0.12 kg moving with a speed of 20 meters per second is calculated as, we know de Broglie wavelength formula, h by p, and h value is 6.63 into 10 to the power of minus 34, and momentum is 0.12 into 20. That is, this is the mass into velocity. This comes out to be 2.76 into 10 to the power of minus 34 meters. Okay, children, 10 to the power of minus 34 meters of this order. It is a very, very, very small value, children. Okay, it is a very small value. So macroscopic objects do not show wave-like behavior. That is you and me, the ball. Okay, they do not show wave-like behavior because their wavelengths, yes, they are associated with a wavelength, but the wavelength is very, 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 very small. It is almost negligible, children. What is 10 power minus 34 meters? A very small value. So macroscopic objects hence do not exhibit wave-like behavior. So it is better we stick to the microscopic particles only. So now let us come to the electron. Okay, children, where electrons diffraction had been observed, and because of these electrons only, we came across or we proved that matter particles also exhibit dual nature. So the parameters that we are going to use here, m is the mass of the electron, E is the charge of the electron. Once again, children, mass of the electron is 9.1 into 10 power minus 31 kg. Charge on the electron, 1.6 into 10 power minus 19 coulombs. And let us say the electron is accelerated from rest through a potential V. That means we are applying a potential difference of V. We are applying an electric field such that it gives a potential difference of, it creates a potential difference of V. Okay, children. And now the electron started to accelerate from rest. The work done by the electric field on the electron is E into V. This is the work done, and this work done is converted as the kinetic energy of the electron. Right, children? So here, kinetic energy of the electron, we know, is half mv square. Kinetic energy of any object is written as half mv square. This we are going to write in the form of momentum. Children, in your first year, we came across this relation between energy and momentum. Kinetic energy can be written as P square by 2m. Kinetic energy can be written as P square by 2m. So by transformation, P is equals to under root of 2mk. See here, children, P square I can write as 2m into k. So P will become under root of 2mk. K we have seen is equal to LEVO, EV, E into V. So momentum P I can write as under root of 2MeV. Hence lambda, the de Broglie wavelength given by h by p, is equals to h by under root of 2MeV. Substituting the P value here, 2MeV. Now children, in this, all the values, whatever the values we know the H value, 6.63 into 10 power minus 34 joule second. The mass of the electron, 9.1 into 10 power minus 31 kg. The charge on the electron, 1.6 into 10 power minus 19 coulombs. When we substitute all these known values, it comes out to be 1.227 by under root of V nanometers, or 12.27 under root of V angstrom units. Okay, children, these are also units of wavelength. Okay, children, these are also units of wavelength. So lambda came out to be 12.27 under root of V angstrom. Now, for a potential difference applied at 120 volts, and what did we get lambda as, children? For 120 volts, we get the de Broglie wavelength of electron as 0.112 nanometer, or it can also be written as 1.12 angstroms. Okay, children, 1.12 angstroms. This is of the order of interatomic spacing in crystals. Okay, children, so already in X-ray diffraction, through X-ray diffraction, the interatomic spacing in crystals was observed to be order of 1 angstrom unit. Okay, approximately 1 angstrom unit. So this is very close to that value, 1.12. So this wavelength is of the order of interatomic spacing in crystals. Matter waves associated with electrons could be verified with crystal diffraction experiments. So the scientists, Davison and Germer, they took crystals to observe the electron diffraction. Okay, children, because there should be a compatibility between the incident for electrons and the emitted electrons, between the interatomic spacing, so that emission takes place. So crystal lattices were found to be perfect to observe electron diffraction. So crystals were considered to observe electron diffraction. In 1929, the genius of de Broglie was awarded Nobel Prize in Physics for discovering the wave nature of electrons. Okay, children, so if we go back, you will realize that de Broglie has given the hypothesis that matter particles can also behave as waves, right, children? Matter also can behave as a wave. So for this discovery, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1929. Next, we have another important contribution from a scientist called Werner Heisenberg. Okay, children, Werner Heisenberg. So he came up with his uncertainty principle. Okay, children, he came up with his uncertainty principle. It is impossible to measure the position and momentum of a particle at the same time exactly. Okay, children, according to Heisenberg, he says that it is impossible to measure the position and momentum of a particle at the same time exactly. What does he mean, children? How is it that we are connecting the matter wave to this Heisenberg uncertainty principle? Here, children, position, he is talking about the particle nature and momentum. When the particle is moving, it is carrying its wave. Okay, so position and momentum we cannot find out at the same time. We cannot calculate at the same time exactly. There is always some uncertainty in the specification. Children, it is like when you are writing your examination. Okay, there are some students who write very neatly, who have got gifted presentation skills. Okay, but children, they keep running out of time, isn't it, children? Because they are more concentrated towards presenting the paper very neatly. Okay, so uncertainty in maintaining the time. Okay, and we have another set of students who are experts at writing very fast and completing the paper within the stipulated time, but they compromise with the presentation. They compromise with the presentation. That means their handwriting and the margins to be drawn. No, they don't care about much about that. So here, uncertainty in the presentation, uncertainty in the time, uncertainty in the presentation. It is always existing. We have certain students like this, we have certain students like that. We have very few students who can collaborate these two perfectly. Okay, children, I hope you understood the concept of uncertainty. Some students have uncertainty with the time limit. Some students have uncertainty with the presentation. So there are very few who can actually combine these two together and come out. Okay, so there is always some uncertainty in the specification of position and in momentum. Now, children, let delta x is the uncertainty in specification of position. You can also think this as the error in the specification of position. That is, suppose you have observed the position of electron somewhere, but it may or may not be exactly at the same position. That is the delta x, error in the specification of position. Delta p, is uncertainty in specification of momentum. Uncertainty in specification of momentum. Now, according to Heisenberg, the product of these two uncertainties, delta x into delta p, is given by h by 2 pi. Okay, children, it is given by h by 2 pi. Delta x into delta p is equals to h by 2 pi. You can see the diagram here, children. We are observing at the same time the particle position and the wave momentum. That is, either you can see the electron as a particle or you can see the wave, but both we cannot observe together. That is the uncertainty talking about, children. This is nothing but again Bohr's law of complementarity. Did Bohr mention this regarding radiation of dual nature of radiation? He said, yes, radiation can be a wave, radiation can be a particle, but together, no, it cannot exhibit both of them together at the same time. Similarly, electron also cannot be a particle and a wave at the same time. Either you are looking at it as a particle or you are looking at it as a wave. Okay, children, that is the meaning of this uncertainty. Now, coming back to this equation, if you assume that delta x is equal to 0, that means there is no error in the specification of position. If you assume there is no error in the specification of position, then delta p has to be infinite. Delta p has to be infinite. Similarly, why infinite, children? See, the product should come out to be h by 2 pi. Yes or no? So if this becomes 0, this should be a very, 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 very large value. You can't even imagine, because anything to the product should be in the product of 0 should be a 0. But if delta x is 0 or approximately 0, then delta p should be so large that the product comes out to be h by 2 pi, which is certainly impossible. Yes? And vice versa also. Vice versa means, children, if delta p is equal to 0, then delta x should be infinite. Let us see a few more points about this, children. If delta p is equal to 0, then the electron must be having is a definite lambda, a definite de Broglie wavelength. That is, delta p is equal to 0 means what, children? That is, we have not done any mistake in measuring the momentum of the electron. We are very certain about it. There is no uncertainty in measuring the momentum of the electron. If this is true, then the electron should be having a definite wavelength. Okay, children, it should be having a definite wavelength. What will happen if the electron exhibits a definite wavelength? If the electron exhibits a definite wavelength, then the wave pattern must extend all over the space. Okay, all the space it has got. So the wave pattern will extend all over the space, which means electron is not localized. Okay, children, if it has a definite wavelength, then it must extend all over the space, and it does not, which means it has a continuous value, children. It does not get damped anywhere. The wave is not damping anywhere. Okay, so if it has a definite wavelength, then it extends all over space, which means that the electron is not found to be localized. Because of that, what is happening? Delta extends to infinity. Why, children? The more space the electron has got, the more space it can move into. Yes or no? Then how can you be so sure about finding the electron at a certain position? Yes, which means that the uncertainty in finding the position of the electron becomes infinity. So when delta p is equal to 0, delta x tends to infinity. Understood, children? But matter waves extend over some finite regions of space only. Okay, matter waves are not infinite. Matter regions have a finite region of space. They are restricted. They have a restricted region, which means that delta x is not infinity and delta x has a definite value, a fixed value. A wave packet of finite extension doesn't have a single wavelength. It spreads around a central wavelength. Okay, children? So a wave packet is nothing but the wave exhibited by a matter particle, the electron. So an electron, it does not move in a single wavelength, children. It is spread around a certain central wavelength. That means it has a peak wavelength and there is an increase and decrease around this central wavelength. We will see in the next slide, children. Right. So this is the wave packet of an electron, children. See, there is an increase and there is a decrease again. Okay. And if at all the matter wave has definite momentum, if the matter wave, as we assumed, if it has a definite momentum, then this is the wave type. Okay, children. So this type of wave extends forever. Yes or no? It is a progressive wave, we know. So it extends forever. Whereas here, there is a certain wave packet where we know the region of space occupied by this wave packet of electron, we can find the electron in this region only. Okay, children. So this is the Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. Now let us see some numerical problems connected to the de Broglie wavelength. What is the de Broglie wavelength of a dust particle of mass 1 into 10 power minus 9 kgs drifting with the speed of 2.2 meters per second? Okay, we have to find out lambda de Broglie wavelength of a dust particle of mass 1 into 10 power minus 9 kg drifting with a speed of, drifting means moving because of some force, with a speed of 2.2 meters per second. So given m is equal to 1 into 10 power minus 9 kgs, velocity is 2.2 meters per second, and h is equal to 6.6 into 10 power minus 34 joule second. That is the Planck's constant. Okay, children. Now the formula for de Broglie wavelength, lambda is equals to h by mv is equal to 6.6 into 10 power minus 34 by 1 into 10 power minus 9 into 2.2. So on cancellation, 2.2, 3 is up. Okay, so we get a cancellation 3 here, cancellation factor. That is lambda will be equal to 3 into 10 to the power of minus 25 meters. This is the de Broglie wavelength. Okay, children. I hope you understood the simple problem. Direct substitution. There is no complication here. Now let us go for the next problem. The de Broglie wavelength of a particle of kinetic energy k is lambda. What would be the wavelength if the kinetic energy of the particle is k by 4? So given that a particle of kinetic energy k has a wavelength lambda, we know from the formula lambda is equal to h by under root of 2m k. Now let lambda dash be the wavelength if kinetic energy is k by 4. Okay, so now kinetic energy is reducing. We have to find out what is this lambda dash. How much is this lambda dash? So substituting in the actual equation, lambda dash is equals to h by under root of 2m k by 4. Instead of k, we are writing k by 4. We know under root of 4 is 2. Okay, so this 2 comes into the numerator so that lambda dash will be equal to 2 lambda. Okay, children, lambda dash will be equal to 2 lambda. That is, if the kinetic energy reduces by 4, then the wavelength, the de Broglie wavelength gets doubled. Understood this, children? Let us go for the next problem now. An electron and a photon have the same de Broglie wavelength of 10 power minus 10 meters. Which of the two has greater kinetic energy? Okay, the de Broglie wavelength is given the same. We have to find out which one has greater kinetic energy, whether the electron or the photon. So let E is the kinetic energy of electron and E dash is the kinetic energy of photon. So for electron, we know lambda is equals to h by under root of 2me, or we can write under root of 2me is equals to h by lambda. Squaring on both sides and by suitable transformations, we have E is equals to h square by 2m lambda square. This is the formula for energy here. Now for the photon, E dash is equals to hc by lambda. Yes, children, because lambda is equals to E by hc. Sorry. Right, children. Lambda is equals to hc by E. For photon, E dash is equals to hc by lambda. Now dividing these two, E dash by E. E dash by E, that is energy of the photon by energy of the electron, we get it as 2m lambda c by h. Okay. Now we know all these values. Mass of the electron, wavelength is given as 10 power minus 10, c is the velocity of light, and h is the Planck's constant. On substituting all of these, 2 into 9.1 into 10 power minus 31 into 10 power minus 10 into 3 into 10 power 8 by 6.6 into 10 power minus 34, we get the numerical value as 82.7. Greater than 1. The fraction is greater than 1. The ratio is greater than 1. E dash by E is greater than 1. Therefore, E dash is definitely very much greater than E, which means the photon energy, photon possesses more kinetic energy than that of electron. Okay, children, I hope you understood these problems. Okay, these are important for your competitive examinations, children. So keep practicing them from your textbook. Now let us go on to the next, children. So till now we have seen the theoretical aspects of the wave nature of matter, but we also have to prove it experimentally. Science does not accept just theory, children. It has to be proved. Anything has to be proved experimentally. So once again, children, do you remember the names of the scientists who proved it experimentally? Yes, Davison and Germer experiment. Very, very important topic we are going to see now, children. The Davison and Germer experiment. So, Davison and Germer were the first to experimentally prove the wave nature of matter particles. So, the de Broglie wavelength of an electron is less than 1 angstrom. Okay, children? The de Broglie wavelength of an electron was calculated to be less than an angstrom. A crystal lattice with interatomic spacing of the order of 1 angstrom is ideal for electron waves. So, this was already calculated by X-ray diffraction experiment, children. The de Broglie wavelength of an electron less than is 1 angstrom. This was already founded by X-ray diffraction. Now, a crystal lattice with interatomic spacing of the order 1 angstrom is ideal for electron waves. So, this is an image of the nickel crystal, children, which was used for this experiment. Children, this is a schematic sketch of the Davison-Germer experiment. Here we have a circular scale, okay, a circular scale. We have a rotating table on which the nickel crystal is placed. This table rotates so that the detector here, with the help of this arm or this lever, it rotates about this circular scale. Okay, children? And we have a filament made up of tungsten, which is connected to a low voltage supply. Okay, children, when the supply is on, the filaments gets heated and electrons are emitted from the filament. Okay, and there is an electron gun here, children. This is electron gun. This box consists of the electron gun. What does this electron gun do? How does it function? If you can see here, children, the electron gun is connected to high voltage batteries. Okay, children, these high voltage batteries are applied to the electrons that are emitted from the filament. These are accelerated by the electrons. These are accelerated by the high voltage. Okay, the electrons are accelerated here by the high voltage and they're emitted from this hole, children. Okay, they get emitted from this hole. Okay, these emitted electrons strike the nickel crystal normally. Normally means, children, perpendicularly. Okay, they strike the nickel crystal perpendicularly in this manner. Okay, children. So what will happen now? When these electrons are incident upon the nickel crystal, it was observed that some electron beams got scattered from the nickel crystal and it was observed by the detector, Not only in one direction, children, the electron beams were scattered in different directions. Okay, the electron beams got scattered in different directions and the detector was placed in various positions. Okay, children, you can see the red colored object here. The detector was placed in various positions to see where there was a maximum intensity of the emitted current. Okay, children, and it was initially kept at 50 degrees. It was initially kept at 50 degrees, children. How are we measuring the angle? See, children, this is the direction. You can see here a small diagram. This is the direction of the electrons coming from the electron gun. Okay. And this is the direction of the electrons caught in the detector, caught on the detector. That is a scattered electron beam. The angle between them is theta. Right, children? Now, as I told you, this detector can be moved on the circular scale. Now, see, children, the position of the detector is changed here. The angle is changed. Again, the electrons are emitted and scattered electron beams or the diffracted electron beams are emitted from the nickel crystal. And once again, in this direction now, the detector is recording the electrons, the intensity of the emitted electrons. Okay, children? So the work of the detector is to measure the intensity at various angles. So we are measuring intensity as a function of the angle theta. Okay, the scattered angle theta. Right, children? Now once again, the angle is changed here. And again, electron beams scattered at this angle are recorded by the detector. So this detector is moving through the scale in with different angles, and we will be able to record the intensities of the current produced by the electrons at different angles. It was observed that at theta is equal to 50 degrees, it gave rise to maximum current. So intensity of diffracted electrons is measured as a function of theta. Okay, children? As I told you, theta is varied and the intensity of the diffracted electrons is measured with the help of the detector. The scattered electron current for different voltage values are noted. So the scattered electron current that is emitted because of the scattered electrons by varying the voltage, by varying the applied high voltage also, it is noted. So we notice a peak at 54 volts, children. At 54 volts, we have noticed a peak value of detector current, highest value of detector current at 54 volts. So below that, it is low current. Above that is also low current. The peak is observed at 54 volts. Okay, children, the peak is observed at 54 volts. It is due to the constructive interference of scattered waves. Right, children? Remember constructive interference from our first chapter? Two waves overlapping with each other. Yes, when they overlap with each other, there is a constructive interference and there is a destructive interference. Okay, because of constructive interference, what is happening? Amplitude becomes doubled, and destructive interference amplitude becomes equal to 0. Okay, so here when the scattered electrons are coming out, they are getting interfered, they're getting superimposed with each other, and at 54 volts they are giving a peak current, a high value of current. Now when does interference take place? For what interference take place? Interference can take place for waves only, children, not for particles. Remember, okay? Interference is very much a wave phenomena. Okay, we have studied about interference of waves, but not interference of particles. Yes, children, two waves can interfere with each other, can superpose and get that constructive interference. But what about two particles? Particles cannot interfere with each other. Okay, so here from this, what we wanted to say is electrons are able to exhibit wave nature. That is why constructive interference has taken place. Understood, children? Davison and Germer proved that the scattered electrons came out of the nickel crystal and they have a constructive interference among themselves. It is because of the wave nature. Okay, they came out in the form of waves, they interfered with each other, and they gave a peak value at 54 volts. Okay, children? So this is how we say that electrons also possess wave nature. This was something similar to X-ray diffraction. As I told you, same concept, X-ray diffraction. In X-ray diffraction, it was observed. So let us see, children, a review of X-ray diffraction. So here, this is the lattice, children. You see, these dots, what you're seeing are the lattice ions. Okay, this arrangement is called as a lattice. Now, the incident X-rays are incident on the crystal lattice. Okay, children, and the X-rays are getting diffracted. Okay, children, this is the diffraction. the spacing between the two, the interatomic spacing is given by d, and theta is the angle, the diffraction angle. Okay, children. So according to Bragg, this was done by Bragg, children. So according to Bragg, this is given by 2d sine theta is equal to n lambda, or n lambda is equal to 2d sine theta. This is when a constructive interference takes place. Okay, children. For X-ray diffraction, this was taken. Constructive interference takes place for n lambda, 2d sine theta is equal to n lambda, where d is the interatomic spacing, lambda is the wavelength of the incident radiation. Okay, children. And n is called as the order of diffraction. Theta here is the angle at which strong reflection occurs. So for X-ray diffraction, strong reflection was observed at 65 degrees, children. So we have a comparison between these two here. From X-ray reflection by nickel crystal, D is equal to 0.91 angstrom. The interatomic spacing in nickel crystal is 0.91 angstrom. Theta is equal to 65 degrees, as we mentioned. For the first order of diffraction, n is equal to 1, lambda is equal to 2d sine theta. So that lambda comes out to be 1.65 angstroms. Okay, children. And from Davison-Germer experiment, V is equal to 54 volts. That is a peak current. Lambda is equals to h by under root of 2 MeV. Substituting all the values here, we calculated, Davison and Germer calculated lambda to be 1.67 angstroms. Okay, children. Now, striking resemblance, you can see the equality of these two values, very, very close values from X-ray reflection and from Davison and Germer experiment. Hence, we can say that electrons or matter particles also behave as the waves. From this experiment, because of the similarity of these two experiments, X-ray, the similarity in the result of these two experiments, the X-ray reflection and the Davison-Germer experiment, it is established that electrons also behave as waves. So further, it was concluded that not only electrons, but all matter particles, matter particles like protons and neutrons also behave as waves. What about atoms and molecules? Children, the wave nature of atoms and molecule was observed by Easterman and Stern. Okay, children, they observed the diffraction of atoms and molecules by crystals. So instead of using an electron gun here, they made use of helium and hydrogen molecules, and the crystals they used were lithium fluoride and sodium chloride. Okay, instead of nickel, they used lithium fluoride and sodium chloride, and instead of electrons, they made use of helium and hydrogen. So this experiment proved the de Broglie hypothesis of wave nature of matter particles. So as Davison and Germer conducted this experiment for electrons, these two scientists conducted it for the atoms and molecules. Hence, matter waves are associated with all matter particles. Okay, children. So we have satisfactorily established the the wave nature of the matter particles. Right, children? So I hope you have understood all that we have learned in this chapter, and let us see what we have learned in today's session. We have seen the applications of photoelectric effect, the dual nature of matter particles proposed by Louis de Broglie. Waves that are associated with matter particles are called matter waves or de Broglie waves. The de Broglie relation lambda is given by h by mv, which can also be written as h by under root of 2me, h by under root of 2mev. De Broglie wavelength of an accelerated electron is given by lambda is equal to 12.27 by under root of v angstroms. Davison and Germer were the first to experimentally prove the wave nature of matter particles. A peak in the detector current was observed at 54 volts and theta is equal to 50 degrees, which is due to the constructive interference of scattered electron beams. So interference of the electron beams took place. So when does interference take place? Interference takes place only when there are waves. So electron beams acted as waves there. So wavelength determined by the two methods was approximately same. What are the two methods, children? The X-ray diffraction method and the Davison-Germer experiment of electron diffraction. So electrons got diffracted similar to the de Broglie waves. Now children, let us try to evaluate your understanding. Try to answer these questions, children. Write down de Broglie relation and explain the terms in it. All the formulas connected with de Broglie relation, children, you have to write down. State Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. You have to explain it also. Describe the Davison and Germer experiment and what does this experiment conclusively prove. An electron and a photon each have a wavelength of 1 nanometer. You have to find out their momenta, energy of the photon, and the kinetic energy of the electron. Momenta here means two momentum, children. Momentum of the electron as well as the photon, energy of the photon, and the kinetic energy of the electron. Children, I hope you have understood the chapter clearly. This is a very, very important chapter, children. So we are ending the session here and the chapter here. Happy learning, children. Keep visiting the site for more and more lessons to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Rama ma'am. Thank you for your
Thank you, ma'am.
energetic session. I can say that it is very energetic. And dear children, of course, life is a learning process, isn't it? So today I have learned from Rama ma'am, so which is she's a junior to me. Even though she is a junior to me, today I have learned how to explain the Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. See, always I used to tell that it is impossible to determine the position and the momentum of an electron exactly and simultaneously. And today, Madam has wonderfully explained regarding the example of a student who is able to write and who is able to explain clearly. So, who is having a very good handwriting and who is having a good explanation capacity. So, it is impossible to determine the momentum and position of an electron simultaneously and accurately. So, thank you, Rama ma'am. And today I enjoyed your class. In fact, it was an energetic session, and I thank each and everyone for giving us this wonderful opportunity. Thank you,
My
children.
pleasure, ma'am. Credits to my coordinator, ma'am.
Yeah, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.